Hello everybody, welcome to another episode of the Black Country History Hunter. Today we're looking into a thing that for me is a major disaster of the area. It wasn't well spoken of because a lot of it was brushed under the carpet by the government due to something called Defence of the Realm Act. We'll talk about that later. I'm now sitting here on Wolverton Street, Dudley. Now if we'd have been here during 1914 through to 1933, to behind me there would have been huts or ammunition huts. Now, one of the girls that died in today's disaster actually lived in these huts. And we're going to trace her story today, guys, from one point where she takes off here to work on the tram just there on the Birmingham Road, right up to the work where she worked and where she died. 19 girls died that day, guys. A huge tragedy. So we're going to be tracing poor little Annie Edwards. We all know an Edwards in Pensnet, Brierley Hill, Dudley. We all know Edwards is. Well, her name was Annie Edwards. She was 14 years old, guys. She lived here with her mom. I believe her mom would have lived here at the munition huts because they were built for ammunition workers during the war. So basically, we've got some footage of this street. We know what it looked like. One from this photograph. If you look at this photograph here, this was taken around the 1920s. And you can see the munition huts just in the background there. Can you see that? And the reason this photo was took because there was mining disturbance to this side of us, and they had to get the road up and redo it. And also we have footage of them being burnt down. At the end of the munition hut's life, they got too bad. After the war, they started housing people there. There was quite a few of them, but in about 1933, it was too bad. You know, they wanted this area for other stuff, so they decided to burn them down, a way of getting rid of them. The mayor of Dudley is helping out. You can see this postcard here where he's helping to burn the hutments. And also this video, guys, check this out, man. This is amazing.
One way of getting rid of a bungalow town is to burn it. These buildings are relics of the war, hutments erected to house the munition workers of Dudley. The local people who have inhabited the huts since the armistice have been found alternative accommodation, and the conflagration is quite a civic occasion. The fire brigade is duly on the job. Someone must have shouted fire, but they are only protecting the neighboring villas.
On that video there, it was actually showing them burn the huts down. So where I am today, where my camera is today, there was a PLAQUE news team actually watching the burning of the hutments, guys. So yeah, so now we're going to go down to the bus stop, try and get the bus onto Tipton or up the Birmingham Road, the way that poor little Annie would have gone that day, guys. And we'll talk a bit more about Annie on the way. It's a disaster, guys. It's a bad disaster. 19 girls burnt to death. Burnt to death. It's horrific. Let's go and find out about it. Right, guys, we're here at the bus stop now. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, well, 3 buses pulling up, loads of people getting on. This is where little Annie Edwards waited that morning on the 5th. She started work at around 8 o'clock. Well, not around, she started work at 8 o'clock and they finished at 5:30. These girls were being extortiated. They were being put in a position where they were saying they were going to get paid so much, but they didn't get as much as they was meant to get. So what we're going to do is today, we're going to wait for the bus. We've missed one we've just turned up. We're going to get on the bus, we're going to go up the road. She went up, this is the Birmingham Road. You can see it on an old map. The tram would have gone right up to where her work was. So that morning, about 7:30, she was in this vicinity. I wouldn't be surprised if the bus stop is still in the same place as it was then, you know, because these things generally don't change. So yeah, the tram stop may have been the bus stop. So we might be in the spot where little Annie Edwards went that day to go up to work in a factory where she's going to be splitting ammunition, .22 ammunition. I'll tell you about that more on the bus. It ends horrifically, guys. If you're tickled stomached, this ain't the video for you. It was horrific. They managed to cover it up using something called the Defence of the Realm Act. Obviously, this was after the war. This was 1922. And in 1922, the war had been over 3 years, so the Defence of the Realm Act still mattered, but it was being used for other things now, for like keeping the government safe rather than protecting the country. During the war, it was needed to, you know, to control the papers, stop bad things going in, like how many people were being killed, protect morale, and get us to win the war. But after the war, they were using it for pushing stories to the back of the paper. Stories like this with the 19 girls dying, they couldn't totally suppress it because it happened, people saw it. Like UFO sightings, you know, if there's so many witnesses, they can't suppress it, they just push the story back, they hide it, they bury it, and then eventually people don't think about it. There is a blue plaque on the building, I've been told, so we're going to see that today as well. But This Defence of the Realm Act was used, I believe, to cover this story up because the government were the ones that sold the ammunition to Mrs. Knowles, the owner of the factory, and her husband to be stripped. Over 100 tons were sold. They paid £500, guys, and they were promised half the profits and the government would have got half the profits as well, or the government's agent. I think there was another middleman. But terrible story. Let's get on the bus. Let's have a look. Right, guys, so we're on the bus now. This is the place where she would have sat on the tram on the way now. We're on the Birmingham Road, following the route she would have took. Quickly, because we're going to get there pretty soon, and tell you a little bit about why Annie's mom was there at all. So during the First World War, there was a massive crisis called the ammunition crisis, where basically the British Army run out of ammunition. They were basically prepared for the war, and they'd been building up stockpiles, but them stockpiles had gone. And once them stockpiles had gone, they couldn't do anything about it. So they had to start making more. They didn't have the right kind of stuff in Woolwich to do it. So what they did was they started recruiting women. It's a good thing for the women's cause. And they got women in the factories. So all the men were away fighting the war, First World War. So they had a shortage of people in the engineering works. Now, even such people as Pankhurst and the suffragettes, they even got on side and said, right, we'll stop doing our militant action. We'll stop doing our militant action because we want to fight the war. You know, during the duration of the war, they'll stop doing all their militant action and get on board. Now, it progressed women's rights because it got women into the factories. Now, I think little Annie became an engineer and started stripping ammunition down over in Dudley Port because of her mum's example. Now, don't forget, a generation before this, women were never allowed in factories. You would have seen them in service. All the women I've seen in the archives are either in service, nurses, jobs like that, nannies, au pairs. They're feminine jobs, or what we would consider feminine jobs then. But now, obviously, a woman can be in any position because they can, because they're rightly so. They can do these jobs, and they do. So it was a watershed in that moment. But I do often wonder if the mom asked herself, Annie's mom ever said to herself, did I give a bad example? Because the girl died from this example. You know, she was probably determined to go to work. A lot of the girls were determined to work. I've read that some of them even were trying to be stopped by their parents from going because they were very young. They would have been going to service at that age. They would have been going to big houses such as the Elms and the Beaches, you know, to serve people, rich people and industrialists who own the factories such as they were working in. But at this point they didn't. They decided they wanted to go into engineering and follow, I think, in the footsteps of their mom. Annie did anyway. So Annie went to work as an engineer. So when these women became these munitionettes, they needed somewhere to live. So the factory in Dudley actually was owned by Mr. Bean. And Mr. Bean was an industrialist, and basically what he did was he decided to start a factory for munitions. When the government said we need arms, we need shells, they started making shells, and they were making shrapnel shells, guys. Now, shrapnel shells were awful. They were like, I'll put a picture up there. They were like, you know, they explode and they literally shower down bullets onto you, and they'll kill everything in the trench. They were making them in Dudley. And then when the government got involved, they made over 100 factories. They were called ammunition filling factories or ammunition projectile factories. And there was an ammunition projectile factory in Dudley on Mr. Bean's land. He allowed the government to put a big factory up there. Thousands of workers, guys. These workers needed somewhere to live. Now, they needed somewhere for them to live. Thousands of workers were flying into the area, women workers. And this was, like I said before, it was a watershed for women. And they were doing these really dangerous jobs, hammering down ammunition. And basically these factories were born and they had to live somewhere, so they lived over at the munition huts. They found a piece of land called Brewery Fields and they built these munition huts. And they were called munition huts. They went on to be called the cottages, or known as the cottages, but they were called the munition huts, and that's where Annie lived with her mum, I believe. And like I say, we're on the bus now, and we're heading towards the place where it happened, guys. Exciting stuff. We're going to visit the grave as well, so stay with us and we'll tell you all about the horrific day, what happened that day. Here, at last, this is where it happened, guys, that horrific day. 19 girls blown to bits, 14, 13-year-olds. We'll go into the graveyard in a minute and I'll read out the names as a vote of respect. It's just starting to drizzle. On this day, 102 years ago, lots of people lost their lives. They would have been running around screaming, burning, the hair was burning off. There are accounts of bits of hair on the floor. The explosion at 11:45, not many people knew what was going on, so they were stripping down this 2-2 ammunition. Now, the ammunition was the ammunition they use on rifle ranges, but what happened was during the war, they needed the ammunition for training troops. But after the war, they had tons and tons of this very small ammo, .22. Now, because it was so small, I don't think Mr. Knowles, when he bought the ammo, he saw the danger in it. He thought, oh, it's only small. But what the girls were doing was they were stripping it down for the brass in this brass foundry behind me. They were meant to be putting the powder into a wooden box, then dumping it in the canal basin down the road. This wasn't happening. So on that day, there was a few of these boxes of gunpowder still there, they reckon, and it just sat there until eventually there was an explosion. It was bound to happen. It had been going for a few months at that point, apparently, and they actually, on that morning, it was just a normal day. These girls coming to work, Annie would have come to about 8 o'clock in the morning. She'd been working for a good 3 or 4 hours when the explosion happened, guys. Boom, suddenly it explodes. The roof comes off. The roof, it wasn't a big building. The roof went right up in the air and landed in the courtyard. Maybe somewhere where we are now, but this is the road, so maybe not. But it was on this side, so the courtyard was maybe there and the building was just behind me. Small little shack. These girls, some were killed outright, others, I think they thought there was only one death in the beginning, guys, but the bodies, as they came running out naked, guys, it actually blew the clothes off them. They were running around in the street here, naked, still on fire, burning flesh hanging from the bodies. Men in the area came rushing out, put sacks on them to try and protect them, got them into cars, best they could, and got them over to Guest Hospital, where the majority of them ended up dying weeks, days after, in agonising pain, guys, blistered skin, the most worst conditions. Now, why this shouldn't have happened is because during the war, there were laws. There were laws, guys. You weren't allowed to have that sort of ammunition in a factory. You weren't allowed to have that sort of ammunition being stripped down or put together without laws. So they were supposed to wear wooden clogs, supposed to have no matches on them. There was hourly searches in what they call the danger zones. There was what they call searches. Every hour, the women would get searched when they were making the ammunition or the munitionettes, which a mum was. A mum must have understood. Now, Mr. Knowles claimed ignorance. He made out that he didn't understand that you had to have all these procedures, and he got fined and he got 5 years in the end. But apparently, these girls were unaware that they were doing something very dangerous, and for very little money. I think for every ton, they got a 2.5 shilling. They were supposed to be getting 7 shillings a week, which is only a quarter of a man's wage as an engineer, but it was still good, but they weren't. One of the moms were complaining that day. They came to the factory that day about 11:45 to see the girl. She went into the room and they saw a stove. And as Mrs. Byron walked away, she thought, hang on, there's a stove in there and there's gunpowder in there. This is dangerous. Seconds later, it exploded. So she understood it, and one of her little girls actually got injured but didn't die. One that wasn't working there. A few women were complaining about the wages at that time, saying the wages were bad that Mrs. Knowles, Louisa Knowles, the owner, and her husband were giving these people. There was a manager there as well. He also got arrested. But yeah, they were running around naked. They got took off to Guest Hospital, guys, where a lot of them died afterwards. In the end, 19 girls, man. And it's hardly heard of. And I think the reason it's hardly heard of is because of this Defence of the Realm Act. After the war, the government continued to use it for their benefit. The government were in the wrong there. They'd given this ammunition out to a subcontractor, not asking any questions where it was going afterwards. So this subcontractor then subcontracted it again to the Knowleses, and they started stripping it at the cheapest they could to make the most money. It was profiteering. But these girls were the ones at risk. And the thing is, they were very young girls that should have gone into very undangerous jobs, but badly paid jobs. And we might say, yeah, it's a watershed for women, and women started to get jobs that they wouldn't have had before the war, which is great. But in this case, it killed them. So these girls are martyrs, guys. They're not just girls, they're martyrs for the women's cause, for the women's votes. These women were pioneers, and all they've got is a little blue plaque. And like I say, I think the Defence of the Realm Act pushed this to the back of the papers. It's in page 7, page 8. Yes, thousands died, millions died during the First World War. But these were girls. These were little girls. This ain't men fighting on the front. These girls were coming to try and make a few pennies to feed their families. Very sad occurrence, guys. It's a Black Country History Hunter. We're here where it happened. The blue plaque's there. The hell was behind me. Nobody ever got fully accounted for in the government. A gentleman called Mr. Knowles got 5 years. People who were in the accident, people who survived the accident, actually did try and get him out of jail, because they said he volunteered to give compensation to those who were remaining. He lost all of his money to the compensation. He also had the ammunition that was left confiscated, which he'd put £500-600 into. So yeah, he basically lost everything. He was a ruined man by the time he got the prison sentence. So they said that was enough, but he did the 5 years. And personally, was that enough? Would you be a parent having your child blown up in a factory and saying the gaffer were to blame? Today, he'd probably get 20 years, and rightly so. It should never have happened. You know, the ammunition should have been dealt with in the way that it was dealt with during the war, safely, underwater, split safely. None of the procedures were followed. It was a proper scandal. And yet it was hardly heard of. It's people I've been speaking today in Tipton, nobody really knows of it. This is the only thing that stands of it, and you could easily pass this on the street and miss it, couldn't you? There's been a few that know of it, but not many. So yeah, and some of the surnames you'll see in a minute, they're all local names. You know, Annie Edwards, guys, she would have come here that day. She was at work for 4 hours before she was blown to pieces. Let's go to the graveyard. So here we are, guys, at the final resting place. This beautiful monument. Not many people passing in the cars today recognise what this is, but this is where the final remains lay of those girls. And this is where our dear Annie ended up, our dear Annie Edwards. Full name, Annie Eliza Florence Edwards, 14 years old. What a shame. I'm going to read out the other names now, guys, so you get some idea of their ages. And there's an old tradition where if you read out somebody's name or say somebody's name or speak somebody's name, you bring them back to life for that brief moment. So let's see if we can bring these girls back to life just for them few seconds that I say their names. Okay, guys, so we had Annie Naylor, 14 years old, okay, and she lived at 172 Dudley Port. We have our Annie Edwards, who obviously, as we know, lived at the A block 77 in the munition huts where we've been earlier, where we started this story. We had Laura Dalloway, just 14 years old, and she lived at number 36 Upper Chapel Street, Tipton. We have Nellie Ray, okay, she was 15 years old, guys, and she lived at 128 Great Bridge Street, West Bromwich. We have Mabel Weaver, she's 14 years old, she lived at 57 Victoria Street, Tipton. We have Violet May, 15 years old, 17 Cleaton Street, Tipton. We have Priscilla Longmore, and she was 13 years old, guys, really young, and she lived at number 337 Dudley Port. We have Lizzie Williams, we all know Williams, 13 again, very young. She lived at 9 Old Canal Street, Tipton. We have Edith Drew, she was 15 years old, Boat Row, Tipton. All of these girls died, guys, in the most horrific circumstances. Edith Richards, 14 years old, 7 Factory Road, Tipton. Eliza Fellows, she was 15 years old, 196 Dudley Port. Okay, 14 years old, Gladys Byron. Now, Gladys Byron was the lady whose mum had come in that day in order to complain about the wages of the young people, and actually got involved in the accident and went to hospital to the guest herself, luckily not badly injured, but one of her daughters was badly injured, and one of her daughters consequently died, as we know, which was Gladys. Okay, and she's buried here as well. We have Lily Griffiths, not sure of her age, Railway Street, Horsley Heath. Margaret Burns, 15 years old, Sheet Wash Lane, West Bromwich. Okay, we have Hannah Hubbard, 16 years old, Dudley Port. We have Elizabeth Aston, 16 years old, and she was also Dudley Port. We have Lucy Edwards, 14 years old, and she was 3 Sheepwash Lane. And we have finally Ethel Dukes, 15 years old, and she lived at Cophall Street, guys. So you could have seen some of the places they lived there. So it was a tragedy. It was a tragedy, and the only girl I could find a picture of was this lady here, and she survived with not many injuries. Some of the building, you can see here a picture of the building after the accident. The roof was blown clean off, as I've said before. Very sad. Somebody went to jail for it, but it's not very well known in the public memory. You know, people who live in Tipton, people who visit this graveyard may know it, people who are historians may know it, but the general public, at the time, it wasn't general knowledge because of this Defence of the Realm Act. You know, they were pushing this stuff to the back of the paper. It wasn't very morale building, was it, to have all these young girls dying? So the public memory, it got pushed to the back, it got forgotten. It was very sad. But here we are today, remembering these girls that, you know, took apart this 2.2 ammunition in order to get the brass scraps, so a man, Mr. Knowles, and his wife who owned it, Mrs. Knowles, could earn a few quid by exploiting these girls, really. Very sad. Very sad. They were rushed to the guest hospital, as I said, and this is their final resting place, guys. So yeah, there you have it, the Tipton catastrophe, or the Dudley Port explosion. We're here today on the day that it happened, March 2024. It happened in 1922, so 102 years to the day, and I've read their names out, and I hope that just brought them to life for a second, and I'll pay my respects now. So that's it, guys. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed that one. I know it was a sad one, but keep watching, guys. We've got lots more coming up, lots more disasters, lots more explores, lots more history. Black Country History Hunter. Keep tuned in. Get subscribed, guys. Only half of you that watch subscribe. It helps a lot when you subscribe. The channel's not making any money at the minute, but if you subscribe, it will grow. The algorithm will grow. The more money we can make, if we can make any, the more videos like this we can make for you guys, bringing these girls' plight to light, as well as other disasters in the area and other history that's not as well talked about. The Black Country. Be proud to be Black Country, guys. I am. I'm sure you am. Let's let the word about it. Let's tell the world about it. Black Country History Hunter. Get subscribing, get sharing, get liking. See you on the next one.
All bells in paradise, I heard them ring. Bits gold on the outside and silver within.